If I told you I was starting 2026 with only $100, most people would assume I was already defeated. They'd think the game was over before it even started. And that reaction, that quiet panic you might be feeling right now, is exactly why this video matters. Because the truth is, starting with $100 isn't a money problem. It's a thinking problem. And I know that might sound strange, especially in a world where everyone tells you that success depends on capital, connections, or luck. But after years of studying how people actually build financial stability, from scratch, from debt, from embarrassment, from behind, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The amount of money you start with matters far less than how you behave in the first 90 days. So let me be very clear about what this video is and what it's not. This is not a motivational speech. This is not believe in yourself advice. And this is definitely not some flashy get-rich-quick nonsense. This is a real plan, a disciplined plan, a plan designed for real people living real lives in a real economy. And if I were starting 2026 with just $100 to my name, no savings, no safety net, no rich uncle, no viral business idea, this is exactly how I would approach it. But before we talk about what to do with the $100, we need to talk about something far more important. We need to talk about why most people fail at this stage. Because here's what usually happens. Someone finds themselves with a small amount of money, $100, maybe $200, and immediately their brain jumps into fantasy mode. They start thinking, how can I flip this fast? What can I invest in? What's the one move that changes everything? And that mindset feels productive. It feels ambitious. It feels smart. But it's also the fastest way to lose the $100. You see, small money doesn't behave like big money. It doesn't have the same job. When you only have $100, that money is not there to make you rich. It's there to retrain how you think. And this is where most people get it wrong. They treat $100 like it's supposed to act like $100,000. They chase returns instead of control. They look for leverage instead of stability. And when it doesn't work, and it usually doesn't, they conclude something dangerous. See, $100 is useless. No, what's useless is the strategy. Let me tell you something most financial influencers will never say out loud. If you can't handle $100 correctly, more money won't save you. It will only magnify your mistakes. That's why this plan starts very differently from what you expect. And it's why the first step has nothing to do with investing, flipping, or side hustles. But before we get there, let's address the emotional side of this. Because if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you feel behind. Maybe you're frustrated, maybe you're embarrassed. Maybe you're tired of starting over. You look around and it seems like everyone else is ahead, buying homes, investing, traveling, figuring it out, while you're sitting there trying to make $100 mean something. And that comparison is dangerous, not because it hurts your feelings, but because it pushes you into bad decisions. When people feel behind, they rush. When they rush, they gamble. And when they gamble with money they can't afford to lose, they usually lose it. So let me slow you down for a moment. If you're starting 2026 with $100, you are not broken, you are not stupid, and you are not out of time, but you are at a crossroads. Because what you do next will determine whether this $100 becomes the foundation of discipline, or just another story you tell yourself about why things never work out. Here's the reframe I want you to adopt right now. This $100 is not money. This $100 is a test. A test of patience, discipline, self-control, willingness to delay gratification, and here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people fail this test, not because they lack intelligence, but because they refuse to respect small beginnings. They spend the $100 emotionally, not strategically. They turn it into food, entertainment, comfort, or distraction, and I get it. When money is tight, treating yourself feels justified. It feels like relief, like reward. But relief is expensive when you're broke, and comfort is the most dangerous drug in personal finance. So if I were starting 2026 with $100, the first thing I would do is mentally separate myself from everyone else's behavior. I would accept that for a while my life will look boring, quiet, unimpressive. And I would make peace with that, because boring is how foundations are built. Now here's where the real shift happens. Instead of asking, how do I turn $100 into more money? I would ask a far more powerful question. How do I make sure this $100 changes how I operate? Because once your behavior changes, money follows, not immediately, but reliably. And this is where the plan begins. In the next part, I'm going to explain why the first move is to protect the $100, not grow it. I'm going to show you why discipline beats return at this stage, and how people who skip this step almost always end up back at zero. We're going to talk about defense before offense, stability before ambition, control before growth. And if you're willing to listen, really listen, you'll realize something powerful. Starting with $100 isn't a disadvantage. It's clarity, because it forces you to stop pretending. It strips away illusions. And it reveals who you're willing to become. So don't rush. Don't fantasize, and don't underestimate this moment. This is where everything either starts or repeats. Let's move to the first step. If you remember only one thing from this entire plan, let it be this. Your first job is not to grow the $100. Your first job is to not lose it. That might sound underwhelming. It might even sound wrong. After all, every headline, every video, every social post is screaming the same thing. Invest early. Make your money work for you. Don't let cash sit idle. But here's what those voices never tell you, because they've never lived this part of the journey. When you're starting with almost nothing, cash isn't an investment tool. It's a psychological stabilizer. And if you skip this stage, you don't just lose money, you lose confidence, you lose momentum, and worst of all, you reinforce the belief that nothing ever works for me. I've watched this happen for years. Someone scrapes together $100. They feel hopeful for the first time in a long while. Then they put it into something they don't fully understand, an app, a trade, a sure thing. It dips. They panic, they sell, or worse, it goes to zero. And now it's not just about the $100 anymore. Now the story becomes, see, I knew it, I'm bad with money. That story is far more expensive than any financial loss. So if I were starting 2026 with $100, January and February would be about one thing only: creating control, not growth, not excitement, not momentum. Control. Because control is what allows everything else to work later. Let me explain what I mean. When people are financially unstable, money leaves their life automatically. Subscriptions, small purchases, emotional spending, convenience spending, habit spending, none of it feels dramatic, but it adds up. And when you only have $100, you don't have the luxury of unconscious behavior. So the first move I'd make, before buying anything, before investing, before starting a side hustle, is brutally simple. I would track every dollar. Not with an app, not with some complicated system, just a simple list. What comes in, what goes out, and why? Because awareness is the first form of discipline. Most people don't overspend because they're reckless. They overspend because they're unaware. And when you bring awareness to your finances, even at a small scale, something shifts internally. You stop reacting. You start deciding. Now here's the part most people resist. If I'm starting with $100, I'm not adding expenses. I'm removing them. Subscriptions, gone. Convenience spending, paused. Impulse treats, on hold, not forever, just for now. And this is where people get emotional. They say things like, I deserve to enjoy life. What's the point if I can't live? It's only $10. But here's the hard truth, and I say this with respect, not judgment. When you're financially unstable, deserve thinking is dangerous, because you don't get what you deserve in life. You get what your habits produce. And right now, your habits are being tested. This isn't about punishment. It's about temporary discipline in exchange for permanent leverage. So during January and February, the $100 stays untouched. Not because it's sacred, but because you are being trained. You're training yourself to sit with discomfort, delay gratification, resist the urge to do something just to feel productive. That ability, right there, is what separates people who eventually build wealth from people who stay stuck. Now let's talk about the next piece, because this is critical. While you're protecting the $100, you're also doing something else quietly in the background. You're buying time, time to think clearly, time to plan, time to breathe. Financial stress shrinks your thinking. It forces you into short-term decisions. But even a small buffer, even just knowing you have $100 untouched, creates psychological space. And in that space, better decisions become possible. Now I can already hear the objection. But if I'm not using the $100, what am I doing in January and February? Good question. You're doing work that doesn't require money. You're auditing your skills, your time, your energy, your willingness to work. Because here's another truth most people don't like hearing. Money is rarely the real constraint at the beginning. Effort and consistency are. During these first 2 months, I'd be asking myself, what can I do that someone else will pay for? What problems can I solve? What skills can I improve without spending money? And I wouldn't rush the answer. Rushing leads to noise. Clarity comes from observation. This is also the stage where many people quit mentally. They say, "This isn't exciting. I don't feel like I'm making progress. Nothing is happening." But something is happening. You're building the muscle that most people never build, the ability to stay disciplined without immediate reward. That muscle is everything. Let me say this clearly. People who fail financially don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because they can't sit still long enough to execute a plan. So January and February are not about visible progress. They're about internal alignment. You're aligning your behavior with where you want to go, not where you've been. And this is where the $100 becomes powerful. Because by not touching it, you're proving something to yourself. I don't need to react emotionally to money. That belief changes how you approach every financial decision afterward. By the end of February, something subtle but important happens. You're calmer, you're clearer, and you're no longer desperate, and desperation is the enemy of good financial decisions. In the next part, we're going to flip the switch. We're going to talk about using the $100 deliberately, not emotionally. We'll turn it from a protected asset into a tool, one that helps you increase your earning ability, not chase false returns. This is where momentum begins. This is where effort turns into income, and this is where most people finally see movement. But none of that works if you skip this step. So if you're watching this and thinking, "I just want to get to the money part," I want you to pause. Because the discipline you build right here, protecting $100 when no one is watching, is the same discipline that will protect $10,000 later and $100,000 after that. This is the foundation, and foundations are quiet. By the time March arrives, something important has already happened. Nothing flashy, nothing Instagram-worthy, but something real. You didn't lose the $100, and that alone puts you ahead of most people. Because while others reacted emotionally, spent, gambled, or chased shortcuts, you learned how to pause, how to think, how to stay disciplined without immediate reward. Now and only now are you ready for the next move. This is the moment where most people make a fatal mistake. They say, "Okay, now I'm ready to invest." But if I were starting 2026 with $100, I wouldn't invest it in the market. I wouldn't trade it, I wouldn't flip it. I would invest it in something far more reliable, my ability to earn. Because here's a truth that changes everything. When you're starting small, income beats investing every time. You cannot compound money you don't have, but you can compound skills, and skills don't crash. They don't go to zero. They don't disappear in a bad economy. They stay with you. So March and April are not about returns. They're about capacity. Let me explain. Most people think income is something you're given by a boss, a company, the economy. That belief keeps them stuck. Income is actually something you build, and the fastest way to build it is to increase the value of what you can offer. Right now, your job is not to find the perfect career. It's not to follow your passion. And it's definitely not to wait until you feel ready. Your job is to answer one simple question. What can I do that someone else will pay me for soon? That's it. And this is where the $100 comes back into the picture. Not as capital, as a lever. If I had $100 in March, I'd use it to remove friction between me and income. Sometimes that looks like a basic tool, a small course, a certification, access to a platform, or even something as simple as reliable internet or software, not because it's exciting, but because it shortens the distance between effort and payment. This is critical. Most people waste time learning things that don't pay. They chase skills that sound impressive instead of skills that are immediately useful. So here's the rule I'd follow. If the skill doesn't realistically lead to money in the next 30, 60 days, it's not the right skill right now. Later. Maybe now. No, March and April are about speed, not mastery. You're not becoming an expert, you're becoming useful. That might mean writing simple content, editing videos, managing social media, doing basic design, helping businesses with outreach, doing hands-on local work. That others avoid the specific skill matters less than the principle. Someone must be willing to pay for it quickly. Now here's where psychology comes in. A lot of people resist this stage because it hurts their ego. They say things like, "That's beneath me. I'm capable of more. I don't want to waste time." But ego is expensive, and when you're building from $100, ego is a liability. You don't need dignity right now. You need traction, because the first dollar you earn changes everything, not financially, but mentally. The first earned dollar says, "I can produce value." And that belief is worth more than the $100 ever was. Once income starts, even small income, you stop thinking like someone who's stuck. You stop waiting. You stop fantasizing, you start acting. And here's another thing most people don't realize. Momentum doesn't come from money, it comes from proof. Proof that effort leads somewhere. So in March and April, my goal wouldn't be to make a lot of money. It would be to make consistent money, even if it's small, even if it's uncomfortable. Because consistency builds confidence, and confidence compounds faster than cash. Now let's talk about what not to do, because this is important. I would not quit my job prematurely, gamble the $100 on opportunities. Obsess over optimization, jump from idea to idea every week that behavior feels productive. But it's actually avoidance. Instead, I'd pick one income direction and commit to it for 60 days. No switching, no overthinking, no chasing shiny objects. Why? Because most people fail not because the idea was bad, but because they didn't stay long enough to get traction. And traction always looks boring before it looks successful. During these 2 months, I'd expect resistance, mental resistance, emotional resistance, fatigue. This is where your brain says, this is too slow, this should be easier. Maybe there's a better way. That voice is normal. It's also lying, because slow, boring progress is how sustainable income is built. By the end of April, the goal is simple. You are no longer dependent on luck. You may not be comfortable yet. You may not feel secure. But you're no longer powerless. You have a skill that produces income, a system, however small, and proof that your actions matter. And here's the shift that happens quietly at this stage. You stop thinking in terms of survival and start thinking in terms of strategy. Instead of asking, how do I make it through this month? You start asking, how do I improve this process? That's a different mindset. That's the mindset of someone who builds. In the next part, we're going to take this new income, however modest it is, and do something most people skip entirely. We're going to stack cash on purpose, not to feel rich, not to show progress, but to create safety. Because once safety exists, your decisions improve dramatically, and that's when the real momentum begins. This is where $100 turns into control, control turns into confidence, and confidence turns into options. Let's keep going. By the time May arrives, you're no longer where you started. You might not feel successful. You might not feel secure yet, but you're different. You've protected your money, you've built earning ability, and now, most importantly, proven that effort leads somewhere. This is the stage where people usually make another mistake. They finally start earning a little money, and immediately their mind jumps to reward. They think, I should invest this now. I've earned the right to relax. I can finally upgrade my lifestyle. And that's exactly how progress disappears. Because income doesn't change your life. Retained income does. So from May through July, my focus would shift to something that isn't exciting, but is absolutely transformational. Cash stacking. Not forever. Just long enough to change your behavior. Let me explain why this stage matters more than almost anything else. When you live without a buffer, every decision is urgent. Every problem feels like a crisis. Every setback pushes you toward debt or panic. And panic makes terrible financial decisions. But when you have even a small amount of cash set aside, $500, $1,000, $2,000, something powerful happens. You breathe. You stop reacting. You stop saying yes to bad opportunities. You stop making fear-based choices. That's what you're buying during these months, not luxury, not comfort. Time to think, time to choose. Time to recover when things go wrong. So if I were starting 2026 with $100, here's how I'd approach May through July. I'd set a clear, boring goal. Build a $1,000, $2,000 cash buffer. Not invested, not tied up, not working. Just sitting there, and yes, I already know the objection. People will say, cash loses value to inflation. That money could be invested. You're missing out on growth. Those people are thinking like investors. Right now, you need to think like a builder. Builders don't optimize returns before the foundation is solid. They make sure the structure can stand. Because here's the truth most people learn the hard way. The worst financial position isn't having cash that earns little. It's having no cash when something goes wrong. And something always goes wrong. A bill, a repair, a delay in income, an unexpected expense. Without a buffer, every one of those becomes a setback. With a buffer, it becomes an inconvenience. That difference changes everything. Now, psychologically, this stage is challenging, because this is when you could loosen up. You're earning more than before. You've been disciplined for months. You feel like you've earned relief, and that's exactly when most people slip. They don't collapse all at once. They leak. A little extra spending here, a small upgrade there, a justification that sounds reasonable. And slowly, silently, progress stalls. So during these months, discipline isn't about restriction, it's about protecting momentum. I would keep my lifestyle the same as it was when I had almost nothing, not because I enjoy suffering, but because I understand leverage. Every dollar you don't spend here does more work later, and here's the quiet reward of this stage. As your buffer grows, your confidence grows with it. You stop feeling like one bad week will ruin you. You stop obsessing over every expense. You stop thinking in terms of survival. That mental shift is huge. It's also why this stage can't be skipped. I've seen people jump from earning straight into investing, and then panic at the first dip because they have no safety net. They don't fail because investing is bad. They fail because they're not ready. Readiness isn't about knowledge, it's about stability. By the end of July, the goal isn't to feel rich. The goal is to feel grounded. You should be able to say, I can handle a surprise. I'm not desperate. I have room to think. That's what a buffer does. And here's the part nobody tells you. Once you're no longer desperate, opportunities start showing up. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You can evaluate options calmly. You can say no. You can wait for better terms. That's power. In the next part, we're going to do something most people never do, even when they start earning. We're going to build a second stream of income. Not to get rich fast, not to chase passive income, but to create redundancy. Because financial resilience isn't about how much you make, it's about how many ways you can make it. And once you have that, you're no longer fragile. You're building something real. Let's move to the next step. By the time August arrives, you've crossed a line most people never cross. You're no longer just trying to get by. You're no longer hoping something changes. You've built momentum, not dramatic momentum, quiet momentum. The kind that doesn't look impressive from the outside, but changes everything on the inside. You have a protected buffer and income-producing skill proof that discipline works, and now we move into a phase that separates stable earners from financially resilient people. This is where we build the second stream. Let me slow this down, because this part is often misunderstood. When people hear second income stream, their mind immediately goes to extremes. Passive income fantasies, online businesses, they don't understand risky investments hustles that collapse the moment they stop paying attention. That's not what we're doing here. The purpose of a second income stream at this stage is not wealth. It's redundancy. Because the most dangerous financial position isn't low income. It's single-point failure. One job, one client, one paycheck. When all your income comes from one place, you're fragile even if you're earning well, and fragility is expensive. So from August through October, my goal wouldn't be to double my income. It would be to make sure that if one stream slows down, I don't panic. This is about psychological safety as much as financial safety. Now here's the key principle I'd follow. The second stream must be simpler than the first. Not more ambitious, not more complex, not more exciting, simpler. Why? Because complexity drains energy, and energy is still a limited resource. You're already working, you're already disciplined. You don't need another full-time commitment. You need something that produces small but consistent income, builds automatically with repetition, doesn't require constant decision-making. This is where people usually sabotage themselves. They say, if I'm going to do something, it has to be big. If I'm adding a stream, it should change everything. That thinking leads to burnout. Instead, think like this. This stream exists, so I'm never desperate again. That's it. Now, practically speaking, the second stream usually comes from one of two places. Either you monetize what you already do, or you redirect excess effort into something repeatable, for example. If your main income is skill-based work, the second stream might be a retainer, recurring service, or small asset tied to that skill if your income is hourly. The second stream might be something that pays monthly. Even if it's small, the numbers don't matter as much as the structure. Even $100 a month from a second source changes your mindset. Because now, you're not one missed paycheck away from stress. And here's the part that matters psychologically. Once you build one backup stream, your brain stops seeing money as fragile. You stop clinging to one source. You stop tolerating bad conditions out of fear. You stop feeling trapped. That shift alone is worth more than the money. Now let's talk about discipline during this phase, because this is where people get overconfident. They think, I've got this figured out now. And then they loosen structure. They spend more. They work less intentionally. They stop tracking. Progress doesn't collapse instantly, it erodes. So during August, September, and October, the goal is to maintain boring consistency. Same habits, same discipline, same focus. Because this is the phase where repetition compounds, not in dramatic ways, but in reliable ones. Every month, the second stream exists. Your stress drops, your confidence rises, your options expand, and here's something important to understand. When you're no longer fragile, people treat you differently. Employers sense it. Clients sense it. Negotiations change, not because you say anything, but because you don't need them. That's leverage. Now let's talk about what not to do in this phase. I would not quit my main income, prematurely inflate my lifestyle to match progress, take on debt because I'm earning more now, chase scale before stability. All of those are emotional reactions, not strategic ones. Remember, growth comes after stability, not before. By the end of October, the ideal position looks like this. You have a buffer, you have a primary income, you understand you have a secondary stream that runs alongside it. You're calm, not euphoric, not stressed. Calm is the signal you're doing it right. Now here's the warning that matters most. This is the point in the year where most people lose everything they built, not because they fail, but because the holidays are coming, spending pressure, social pressure, emotional pressure, and people confuse momentum with permission. They say, I've been so disciplined, I deserve to relax. And in a few weeks, they undo months of work. That's why the next phase is the most dangerous, not financially, but psychologically. In the next part, we're going to talk about holding the line, about protecting progress when temptation is highest, about finishing the year stronger than you started, not emotionally satisfied, but strategically positioned. Because building momentum is one thing. Keeping it when no one is watching, that's where real change happens. Let's move to the next step. If you've made it to November following this plan, something important has happened. You're no longer chasing money, you're managing yourself. That might sound subtle, but it's the difference between people who repeat financial cycles and people who break them. Because by the end of the year, the challenge isn't income. It's restraint. November and December are emotionally expensive months. Spending is normalized. Discipline is socially discouraged, and progress becomes invisible. No one sees the buffer you didn't touch. No one applauds the upgrade you didn't make. No one celebrates the debt you avoided. And that's exactly why most people fail right here. They don't lose because they lack knowledge. They lose because they confuse momentum with permission. They think, I've earned this. I'll get serious again in January. It's just a few weeks. But those weeks determine how you enter the next year. So if I were starting 2026 with $100, this final phase would be about one thing: protecting identity. Not protecting money, protecting the version of myself I've built all year. Because at this stage, the biggest risk isn't overspending. It's forgetting who you became to get here. During November and December, I wouldn't change strategy. I'd change perspective. Instead of asking, what can I afford? I'd ask, what position do I want to start the next year in? That question changes behavior immediately. Now let's talk about something most people avoid: reflection. Not motivational reflection, strategic reflection. This is where you audit the year like a financial advisor would. I'd review what actually worked, what drained energy without payoff, where income was reliable, where stress was unnecessary, not emotionally. Objectively. Because the goal isn't to feel proud. The goal is to remove friction from the next phase of growth. Here's what I would not do in these months. I wouldn't start new projects, chase new ideas, over-optimize, take big risks. Why? Because this isn't a growth season. It's a consolidation season. This is where you turn effort into structure. This is where you simplify systems, clean up finances, and tighten routines. And here's something powerful most people never experience. When you don't financially regress during the holidays, your confidence skyrockets in January. You don't start the year recovering. You start it positioned. That's rare. Now let's talk about mindset going into the next year. By December, you should no longer be thinking, how do I make money? You should be thinking, how do I scale what already works without breaking my life? That's the shift from survival to strategy. And it only happens when you've proven to yourself that. You can delay gratification, you can stay disciplined without pressure, you can operate calmly over long periods. That skill is more valuable than any investment. Because money grows fastest when behavior is stable. Now I want you to notice something important. This entire plan didn't rely on luck. It didn't rely on timing. It didn't rely on big wins. It relied on sequence: protect first, earn second, stabilize third, diversify fourth, consolidate last. That order is why it works. And here's the final truth I want to leave you with. Starting with $100 isn't a disadvantage. Staying disorganized is. Most people don't fail because they start small. They fail because they never build structure around progress. If you follow this plan, not perfectly but consistently, you don't just end the year with more money. You end it with control, and control compounds faster than income ever will. You're no longer hoping the future works out. You're designing it, and that's the difference between people who repeat financial stress and people who leave it behind for good. Let's step back for a moment. Not to celebrate, not to exaggerate results, but to understand what just happened. If you followed this plan, even imperfectly, you didn't just improve your finances, you changed your relationship with money. And that's the part most people never fix. At the start of the year, money controlled your emotions. A bill caused stress, a delay caused panic, a small win caused reckless spending. That's not a money problem. That's a control problem. By the end of this journey, money no longer dictates how you feel. You dictate what money does. That's real progress. And here's why this plan works when most don't. It doesn't ask you to believe in motivation. It doesn't rely on discipline spikes. It doesn't promise fast results. It respects human psychology. It assumes you will get tired, you will get tempted, you will get emotional, so it builds systems that work despite that. Most financial advice fails because it's written for robots. This plan is built for real people, people with fear, people with habits, people with pressure. And that's why starting with $100 is actually an advantage. When you start small, you're forced to focus on behavior before return, structure before scale, stability before growth. Those priorities never change, no matter how much money you have later. That's why people who master them early stay ahead permanently. Now let me tell you something important. This plan doesn't make you rich in 1 year, and that's intentional, because wealth built too fast usually disappears just as quickly. What this plan does is far more valuable. It makes you hard to knock down once you've built a buffer, created income redundancy, proven discipline over time, learn to hold progress under pressure. You become financially resilient. And resilience compounds. From this point forward, raises don't disappear, side income doesn't get wasted, opportunities don't scare you, setbacks don't reset you, you don't restart from zero anymore. You restart from structure. And here's the quiet truth most people never realize. The first year is the hardest year you'll ever do. Not because it's the smallest, but because you're building habits without proof. Every year after this gets easier. Not because life is easier, but because you are more patient, more selective, more strategic. That's how long-term wealth is actually built, not through hustle, not through hacks, but through calm, repeatable behavior. So if you're watching this thinking, I wish I started earlier, good. That means you're ready. And if you're thinking, I don't have enough to begin, even better. That's exactly where this plan starts, because the amount of money you begin with matters far less than the order you use it. Protect first, earn second, stabilize third, diversify fourth, consolidate last. Follow that sequence and money stops being a source of fear, it becomes a tool. And when money becomes a tool, not an emotion, that's when your life actually changes.